Thank you very much, Colette, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here this morning to launch the inaugural event for the Irish Manufacturing Association. As Colette has indicated at the start, Ibec is by far the largest business representative organisation on these two islands, as it happens, and given the day that's in it, that important embrace between the two islands is something I'm sure will be a recurring theme in lots of conversations. But despite the outcome of the referendum, the ambition for Ireland remains. We've seen huge progress over the last decade, particularly in what we're talking about today, manufacturing. I think it is clear that manufacturing is in a renaissance on the island of Ireland. Having historically been very much into the north of Ireland, traditionally the south has been agrarian and then, in many people's eyes, jumped to a services-based economy. But in fact, what we've seen with globalisation, and particularly with foreign direct investment to start with, the manufacturing is now one of the key drivers of what is Europe's and the world's fastest growing economy. I'll give some statistics on that in a few moments, but just to say, manufacturing has been a key priority for Ibec over the last 5 years. And so I'm delighted today to see so many of you coming from so many different sectors with a common theme to ensure that Ireland is seen internationally as a global hub for manufacturing and successful trading. So we've been working to promote that ambition. And some of the key stats that will probably get repeated later: there are over 4,000 manufacturing enterprises in Ireland, and as the Minister said, employing nearly 160,000 people. Most of these jobs, in fact, are outside of the Dublin region. Predominantly, after the health and retail sector, manufacturing is the largest employer in the state. So 82% of that employment is outside of Dublin, in contrast to 70% of employment across the economy. It is also responsible, as the Minister indicated, for now near 24% of domestic output. And manufacturing firms, their contribution into society is in the payment of over 12 billion of the supply chain to Irish indigenous suppliers, creating in a yearly up to 6.5 billion in wages. And investment, which is the most significant one of all, in a single year we're looking at investment in the order of around 5 billion. And in fact, that's been the renaissance in driving the Irish economy last year. Investment by firms, it was by far the largest driver of the spectacular growth rate that we experienced in 2015. To put it in context, output in Ireland in 2015 grew by 7.8% in volume terms. In money terms, the Irish economy expanded by 13.5% last year. So in a single year, the size of the Irish economy in money terms grew by 1/8. That's a phenomenon. In such a run rate, the economy in money terms would double in a 7-year period. And it's against that backdrop that we should be rightly ambitious for Ireland, because this notion that Ireland is heavily indebted is just wrong. Ireland is not heavily indebted and hasn't been over the last 2 years. Because of the work that's been done by the manufacturing, Ireland is in a very unique position of having significant balance of payment surpluses, which is indicative of a manufacturing base and an enterprise base that is trading internationally hugely successful. In fact, it's one of the big contrasts between Ireland and the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom remains in a situation where its business model is in deficit, much larger budget deficits and, more crucially, balance of payments deficits from not trading successfully. So when we embrace our colleagues in the United Kingdom, we do so not from a position of weakness, but from a position of strength. And I think that's where the manufacturing and giving voice to manufacturing in Ireland is so crucial. 13.5% growth is decimating all of those debt burdens that we felt were going to choke us. As you know, we in Ibec did not subscribe to that view, nor have we over the last 5 years. Our ambition for Ireland is to achieve its potential growth rate. And its potential growth rate is twice the European average. We believe the Irish economy has a sustainable growth rate of 4% volume growth over the next 20 years, and manufacturing will be key to unlocking that potential. So while the economy is growing faster than that at the moment, this is catch-up from years during the crisis. Last year, net trade contributed nothing to that volume growth of 7.8%. All of it was driven by domestic demand. And the primary driver of that domestic demand was the investment by firms in machinery and equipment and in building and construction. And predominantly, that machinery and equipment and the construction has been in the commercial and manufacturing base. So when I say that this is a renaissance for Irish manufacturing, the facts speak for themselves. As you go around the country and just see the type of work and the type of engaged manufacturing that's going on in this industrial revolution, this fourth generation that we're involved with, it is inspiring. It is one of the things that really should be given voice to. And also, it should be brought to the schools to show exactly what is the ambition for a modern progressive society. It is not just a service-based hub for international finance as others would paint Ireland. There's a huge, strong underpin of making things, creating that value added. And that also stretches in probably the more evocative sectors of the economy, the food and drink sector. That is manufacturing. The manufacturing which we didn't do previously. While Ireland was an agrarian-based society, our largest exports up to the late 1960s was live cattle walking through the streets of Dublin to get onto a boat. No value added, no manufacturing. Now we're home to nearly 20% of the production of infant formula from the very same raw input. Again, this is the renaissance in this modern, dynamic, and manufacturing underpinned economy that we live in. So while we've an ambition for the Irish economy of 4%, it has to be an ambition with a purpose. And again, we can see that in the lifestyles of people. The greatest tragedy in Ireland has been its depopulation. And again, in the day that's in it, it's worth contrasting the performance of Ireland in population relative to Britain. In 1841, when the census was taken on both islands, the island of Ireland had 8 million people and the island of Britain had 17. Today, the island of Britain is approaching 65 million people and anticipated to move to 80 million by 2050, making Britain the largest economy in the European Union. That's why it's so critical that they stay. It is critical for Europe, not just for Britain, and actually not just for Ireland. It's much more crucial for the wider European project on many fronts, but the one more narrowly I'd like to focus on is the economic front. So therefore, as we're now seeing our population rise, and the Irish population has increased by nearly 25% in the last 15 years alone, and we may well see that we've tipped 5 million in the recent census, the island is still below 7 million people. And so in order to try to unlock the potential of the economy, we also need the demographics to work in our favour. However, as the Minister indicated, we now have the situation where Dublin is generating 40% of that gross domestic product that I talked about. And a function of that is that if you contrast with London, which is seen as an aberration in the context of the British, London constitutes just over 20% of the British economy. The typical capital contribution to an economy in terms of output is in the order of 10 to 15%. So we have to address the infrastructural issues. We now have a motorway system that is over 2,500 kilometres. So if you really want to drive around on your holidays on a motorway in Ireland, you can do it. You can knock a few days out of it. But it's all radial into Dublin. So we need that orbital motorway system to unlock the potential where manufacturing is actually taking place and to connect up our major cities together. This is one of the things on the infrastructural piece that we've certainly been pushing with the government. So it feels like old technology, but one of the problems for Ireland is that we're having to deal with having missed the first industrial revolution in the south. We can't be left out for this next wave. And that's why it's exciting, again, as I said, on the day that's in it, that we would hope to see our colleagues in the United Kingdom remain in the European Union. Because one of the more dramatic and dynamic partnerships that exists is between Ireland and the UK on many fronts, but the front I want to concentrate on is the economic front. These two islands are supremely placed to benefit from globalization, and particularly the work of the OECD in the base erosion profit shifting or the corporate tax initiatives that are going on. Both islands are seeing huge foreign direct investment flowing in. We're by far the biggest competitors to each other, but we also collaborate. We're so close in proximity to the access to the City of London finances and to the great universities that Britain have, which spawn out the kind of startup companies and technologies. We're uniquely favoured in our location, so it's in our huge interest that they remain. But as the Minister said, if the vote goes the wrong way, Ireland still has many advantages on which to pivot on. And manufacturing, I believe, gives us that much more significant base now than in any previous generation. To conclude, I think there are a number of challenges. We will be meeting the government next week on Monday and Tuesday around the National Economic Dialogue and to see what are the budget parameters. And whilst the economy is doing well, we are very constrained by the fiscal rules in Europe. And one of the things, I suppose, from this referendum is this is a wake-up call for Europe. People can identify xenophobic attitudes, societal issues, but fundamentally, if we had a strong, dynamic and globalised focused European Union, some of the easier points that the Leave campaign have been able to make could be taken off the table. But we likewise have issues to deal with at a European level. It is clear that the European monetary system, the monetary transmission mechanism, is not working the way it was supposed to. Small and medium enterprises in Ireland are still experiencing significant interest rate costs that are much higher than other parts of the Eurozone. And also, the European fiscal rules are not designed for a dynamic, growing population. So we have a situation where that 13.5% growth in money last year increased the size of the economy by nearly 23 billion euros, and yet we're having a conversation about a budget fiscal space of less than 1 billion. When we have clear demographic pressures to deal with on the current side, be they in health or in education, there is no money left to try to deal with the infrastructural deficits that are already there, but also the infrastructure that could kick on to make the manufacturing base even more spectacular. The more immediate pressures, I think, building the economy, however, are coming from three sets, and I'll finish on this: pay, housing, and skills. On the pay side, it's clear that not all companies are recovering at the same rate, and the reality needs to be reflected in wage expectations. There is no desire, and there will be no return in the short term to centralised wage bargaining within the economy. Of course, pay must rise over time to reflect the productivity that's in the economy, but this needs to occur at a sustainable rate. However, what we do need as a society is to have a conversation about what is the sustainable rate, not just of pay, but also of tax cuts, of pension developments, of industrial peace, and about sharing the gains across society in a fair way. I think that will be part of the discussion that will take place in the coming weeks in Dublin Castle. On the housing, this is now by far the greatest crisis that we're experiencing, and probably the biggest block on those kind of growth rates we're talking about. The tragedy of this is this was apparent 3 years ago. A lot of the naysayers who said the Irish economy would never recover, never even gave it a timeline, have now gone silent, but they've now come back to say this is a disgrace on the housing. The very same commentators. What we need is a major and immediate new approach to improve the supply and affordability of housing. But what's crucial, and again, one of the mistakes of the past, is that wage increases are not part of the solution to this particular problem. Wage increases are for the productivity that is delivered at the workplace. The circumstances of individuals in the workplace are important to employers. They may have concerns for the society in which workers are living in, but that cannot be reflected in the wage rate. The wage rate is for the productivity delivered at the workplace. The circumstances of the individuals coming in is not a workplace issue, and therefore concepts such as the living wage clearly have no place at the enterprise level, despite the push that is now coming on to place that concept and put the pressures on providing societal outcomes at the heart of the employment relationship. So while people will rightly look for higher wages because they have concerns for rents and housing, it is exactly in the wrong place, because that will undermine the capacity to deliver the jobs to create the sustainability for the society we wish. And again, this is something we'll be bringing forward in the next week. Finally, then, on the skills. The shortages that are emerging in the economy are manifest, and particularly in manufacturing. And again, I think our educational institutions have shown great flexibility, but they perhaps have been building for a narrative that said that the future was services and not manufacturing. And I think there's a need to refocus that, to refocus our efforts on the manufacturing base, and I think that's what the Irish Manufacturing Association will help deliver. The regional forums that we've had over the last year provide the opportunities for SMEs, and particularly manufacturing SMEs, to engage. And I think this will help also deal with the unemployment problem as it exists. Our unemployment rate, while a headline of 8%, the reality is that the Irish economy is back at full employment. Anybody who is dealing in the labour market, trying to match skills with people, will know that the labour market is at capacity. And so we're going to need to address that much more fundamentally than the kind of narrative that says there are no jobs, there are lots of people unemployed, it's jobs first. It's not jobs first anymore, it's activity first. Activity will generate the capacity to take on more people. But we have to focus in on our competitiveness if we're not to lose that improvement in the rankings. So finally, for me, I'd just like to say that for Ibec, manufacturing is and will remain a top priority for driving the economy to fulfill on that ambition that we have. One of the features that we've done is the internationalization of the Irish economy is to form great alliances. Great alliances across Europe with our colleagues in Business Europe and with our colleagues at the Confederation of British Industry. But in the last year, we've also reached out to the National Manufacturing Association in the United States to collaborate on this joint effort. And in that regard, I'm going to finish by handing over to Jay Timmons, who's the CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers in Washington, who had hoped to be with us today, but unfortunately couldn't, and I think he sent a video message. So as I end, I think I'll hand over to Jay if somebody can do the technology. Thank you.
Timmons, the President and CEO of the National Association of Manufacturers, your counterpart in the United States that represents over 14,000 manufacturers of all sizes. Now, I might be filming this message in Washington, D.C., but I can tell you I'd really rather be in Ireland with you. After all, my family roots are in the O'Donnell and Shirey clans. I want to thank Ibec and your CEO, Danny McCoy, for the chance to address you. You'll find no stronger champion for business in Ireland than Danny and his great team. In recent years, both our countries have experienced the economic benefits from the growth of manufacturing. In the United States, manufacturing now contributes nearly $2.2 trillion to our economy, and that's up from $1.7 trillion in 2009. Still, our manufacturers are grappling with many challenges, slowing our growth. In the United States, the economic news is mixed, and the NAM's recent survey of manufacturers showed that respondents are more upbeat than 3 months ago, but recent data, like the May jobs numbers, were disappointing. We all know that in today's global economy, we face a range of headwinds. Some of these are unavoidable, but others we can overcome if we work together to secure the right policies in Washington and Dublin and around the globe. Like you, we want our business sectors and governments to collaborate on policies that will strengthen manufacturing. And this includes a business climate that fosters innovation and regulations that are based on sound science and create far less red tape. This also includes efforts to boost trade, like the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Now, if that agreement is strong and successful, it can grow good-paying jobs and bolster modern manufacturing. The focus needs to be on ambitious outcomes that will eliminate barriers and set a global standard, not a weak or a TTIP light agreement. You understand what's at stake. Most of the companies represented at the conference have a large presence in the U.S. and around the world. Some are members of the NAM as well. As long as we continue to come together around the cause of manufacturing success, well, our future is bright, and our industry has limitless potential. So thank you again, and please know you've got many friends across the Atlantic at the NAM. I look forward to raising a Guinness with you in person someday soon, but until then, have a mighty good time at the rest of your conference.